Aloha, everybody. I'm so excited to have this space today. My name is Ann Curtin, the Wall Street coach, and this is going to be a conversation about what intuition is and what it is not. I work as a coach for traders, helping them to end the cycle of self sabotage. I'm really looking forward to uh, having Jason share so much of his wisdom and incredible life experience with all of you today. So, this is going to be an amazing conversation that I hope you guys will want to listen to again and again. Shane, it's so good to see you here. And aloha, Jason. How are you?
And thank you for the introduction. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I was on
That's
another
okay.
call and couldn't
No,
bail.
that
Um,
is okay.
so, Kim, I think the place to start, and because I think it's the most important part, is to talk about the benefit of intuition in investing. And Erica, thanks for joining. It was your question and back and forth from like six
Yes,
weeks ago that led to Kim saying, "Hey, let's do like a Twitter live about
e-
this." So,
exactly. So thanks,
welcome.
Erica. I'm so
So,
glad you're
so
here.
the most important thing about intuition is that if you train it well, it can answer questions that otherwise defy any other sort of an answer. And here I'm talking about the part of investing that can't be answered by data. And one of the things that is true of all data is it's always historical, and all investing is forward looking. It's about anticipating futures and putting yourself in position for anticipations of future outcomes. And so there's a mismatch actually between the way typically people will invest and the actual job. And the reason people look at data, of course, is because they're hoping to identify things that have a probability of repeating themselves in the future to give them a sense of what things are likely or not likely. And that's what analysis and intellect and mathematics and other quantitative measures are for. And I'm certain that both Shane and Erica, you're pretty good at that if you're trading. And most of the trading platforms do a pretty good job of equipping people with those kind of quantitative measures. But then there's everything else. And not everything that's important at a business can be measured. And this is where intuition comes into play. And as a former portfolio manager of a mutual fund and had some success, I think intuition was probably about 30% responsible for the success that I had, which is pretty significant. And it helped me answer questions such as, can I trust the statements being made by management about their competitive position, future performance? It was helpful in answering questions such as, this key issue which they're being impacted by today, um, can is it going to really be damaging to the business? I'll give you an example. Probably the best investment I ever made, but also the source of a mistake, is a company called Tech Holdings. They're the world's largest administrator or seller of lottery equipment. And this sounds hilarious, really, when you think about it. But it turns out it's really difficult networking computing problem to build lotteries. In any case, they operated in Brazil and they had had a contract in place for 10 years. They were accused under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of having bribed a Brazilian official. And so at that moment, there's the facts of, did they in fact bribe this Brazilian official? But there's a huge opportunity at that moment too, because as soon as they disclosed the lawsuit and the government of Brazil disclosed the lawsuit, not surprisingly, the stock price declined because Brazil was a significant part of Tech Holdings' top line. And so, in using intuition, was like, now a great buying time, or is it not a good buying time? And so that's like an example of where intuition is the only way that you can possibly make a decision under that circumstance, because there's only one underlying fact, and that fact is going to be established in a court of law. And if you don't act now, you may miss out on a great opportunity. And so that's an example. Another example of intuition is understanding crises. So right now we have a crisis, front and center with Hamas v. Israel, and what are the key issues there, and how do I respond to that, and what's going to play out. So what I'm saying is that intuition is a complement to the other work you do. It's not a replacement. I have coached people and have had people that have approached me over the years that think that intuition is a replacement for analysis, and I don't think that at all. Nor do I think it's superior. I think it's a better tool for some jobs, and it's a worse tool for other jobs. And I'll pause because I'm certain you guys have questions.
Yeah.
And I have a couple of bullet point things that I want to make sure we hit, but I'll
Yeah.
pause in case there are questions.
Yeah, beautiful. Jason, thank you so much for diving in so deep, so quick. What I would love to have happen, because I really want, obviously, our two listeners to know more about you, but also those listeners that'll come and listen to this after the fact. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your own journey with intuition? I cannot stress strongly enough how powerful Jason's book, The Intuitive Investor, is. The subtitle, A Radical Guide for Manifesting Wealth. I was very fortunate to meet Jason. I was looking at the book of yours that you signed for me. It was signed 2017, Jason. So you have a long, robust journey. But I'd also like you to talk, you hinted at what you are currently doing as well. But let's just have people have a sense of how your journey began towards intuition and where you now are and how you are a contribution with your business currently.
Oh my goodness. I say oh my goodness because it's like where to like
Begin.
pull out the narrative and not torture everybody, with
Oh,
biography. I think I'll go back to my investment management career at a mutual fund, and the I was a research analyst for just 2 years, and the Davis funds, which is where I worked, they really liked me a lot. And so I was fortunate to be promoted to portfolio manager after just 2 years, which is not the usual journey. And my first year as an investment manager, I was hyper analytical. And I thought that my job was to, read more than anybody else. It was to analyze things more than anybody else. It was to create better valuation models than anybody else. It was to out quantify everybody. And I got promoted to PM, and my first year sucked. Like I just was absolutely hideous. And I just recognized that if I was had a pathway forward, it just wasn't going to be that one. And I had a person in my life at that time who was a very intuitive person and understood things almost instantaneously. And I marveled at her ability to sort of synthesize information really rapidly and just key into things. Whereas I was sort of trying to reconstruct a mosaic one tile at a time, she had the ability to see the whole picture and then get granular if she wanted to. And so I had her as a role model to sort of watch that. And what I discovered is that I had always had a pretty good sense of intuition, but that over time, through kind of our Western world education and its sort of predominance of, hey, we can only manage the things we can measure, which is total BS. But nonetheless, that's a mental model that people carry around, and you're certainly taught it in graduate business school, and a lot of investors believe that that's true. But the reality is that quant trading, quant hedge funds, all the other day traders, all the other investment professionals that are out there, they're also looking at the same narrow slice of information. And so you have to have an insight or respond more quickly than they do if you're going to benefit. And I just think from the quantification of that information, it's really, really difficult. It's not impossible, but it's difficult to have edge. And so I think that my journey with intuition was the less I started, like I just really struggled with overwhelm when I was a professional investor my first year. And then because of this example from this woman that I knew, I just stopped reading as much as I did, and I realized I need to stop and let my sort of brain subconsciously sort of reassemble stuff. And the less work I did, not the more work I did, the better I got at what I did, and that was mind blowing to me because that's not supposed to be how it is. And just to quantify this, like the first year I worked as a research analyst, I was working, and if you do the math, you guys won't believe me, 105 to 110 hours a week. So there are 168 hours in the week, and that's working 18 to 19-hour days, 7 days a week, which is what I was doing. And, I was middling. I wasn't horrible, but I was middling. And by the end of my career, when I was a Lipper #1 portfolio manager and it had turned a 3-star fund into a 5-star fund, I was working probably 35 hours a week. And I credit that to this felt sense of, as information rolled in, this is important, this is not important, this is important, this is not important, and having the ability of intuition to help sort that. So intuition made me much more efficient, and it helped me zero in on the key information. That's just to say I was perfect, but they say there's an old line in investing that if you're right 60% of the time, you'll be brilliant. If you're right 55% of the time, you'll have a firm. I was like, my actual batting average as an investor was a little over 70%, and I think a lot of that value add had to do with intuition. What am I doing now? I'm the CEO of a company called Deception and Truth Analysis, and we use the findings of deception science, which is a 100-year-old science, to evaluate almost any document for its level of deceptiveness or truthfulness. And yes, we sell to finance and investing professionals, and we're trying to solve the last mile problem, which is how do I trust management?
Beautiful. Jason, I do believe you that you're working those hours. Having worked in finance myself, it is a grueling collection of hours that I think is default setting, not just in the corporate world, but also for especially new traders. They have a tendency to be always at their desk. I'm curious if you could just speak a little bit to the developing of what facilitated your ability to get to that place where you could reduce your hours and be much more accurate in those choices of this is important to pay attention to, this is not.
Yeah, so let me, Kim, though you didn't ask it, I think it's necessary context to be able
Yes,
to help the group to get this. One of the questions I get frequently, and when I have workshopped and taught intuition, both because of my book, but also to institutional investors, because for several years I worked as a consultant advising firms, and intuition was one of the things eventually, every occasionally, like every once in a while, people requested that training. One of the profound confusions is, what the hell is the difference between instinct and intuition? And most people think it's the same thing. And I think we should spend a little time here, because then how to develop it is much more obvious.
excellent.
So the short answer is, instinct is an emotional reaction to some sort of stimulus in which there's not usually a pause. So I think the easiest way to do it is just to give an example. Imagine it's 150,000 years ago and you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you go to the watering hole and you're getting water. And as far as you can tell, there are no lions around. And as you reach in to get some water out of the watering hole, a crocodile emerges. Instinct is, I need to get the hell away from the crocodile as quickly as possible. There's zero pause between instinct and reaction. And I've known traders who are brilliantly instinctual, and they when they see news, they know exactly the correct reaction to that. And it tends to be that instinct doesn't have deliberation, it just has action. And that's exactly how it looks. You think about professional athletes, they tend to operate based on instinct. And the ones that are gifted athletes, their mind body connection is pretty huge. And so they just act. Intuition, by contrast, is the ability to insert a pause into almost anything, and it's like a form of direct knowing that involves the intellect, and it's very different. So for example, I'll just give an example from my own career, and it's in the book The Intuitive Investor. So one of the companies that I was investing in is a company called Devon Energy, ticker DVN, which is still around, and we were the largest shareholder of that company at the time I was an investor. And they did a series of acquisitions very rapidly to grow their natural gas portfolio. They had tended to be a heavy oil portfolio company, and yet the natural gas prices were becoming much more competitive per BTU than oil. And so people were critical of the company that they didn't have as much exposure to natural gas as other firms. And so they did these acquisitions, and it became the narrative of Wall Street that they overpaid for these assets to do two things: compensate for to build their portfolio as soon as possible, but then in addition, the CEO at the time was a guy named C. Larry Nichols, and Larry was the son of the founder. And so there was an accusation that he was trying to outdo his father, and that he was an empire builder. And why did he overpay for these assets? And there's some unwritten rules about this. So the instinctual response would be when the stock price dropped really rapidly, there's value in getting the hell out of the stock. The day they announced their second big acquisition, they did like two big announcements in the series of like 9 days or something. And the instinct would be, okay, I know the stock price is going to tank. I'm out of here. Um, but the intuition point of view is there value here? And to begin to examine this, those narratives that existed about Larry Nichols, well, if you met Larry Nichols, and I had, or you'd seen him on CNBC and he was on CNBC talking about these deals, he was usually the smartest guy. And he did, in fact, come across as kind of an arrogant ass. And so you could see why people would think that. The intellectual would endlessly bog down in assessing the balance sheet and the opportunity, and where did they pay for these assets, and what can they realize in terms of production, and can they increase production based on the quality of their geology and their engineering, all that shit. But the most important question to answer is, if Larry Nichols is in fact an empire building, then we've an empire builder, we've got trouble. So, and I recognize that the traders tuning in here don't have access in the way that I'm about to describe, but the point still remains: this is intuition. So I was on an airplane ride to New Orleans to attend the Howard Wheel Energy Conference, and I was going to be having dinner with Larry. And so I was like, how do I ask him this question? Are you an empire builder? And of course, everybody in the universe had asked him a version of that question like 80 different ways. And he was a smart guy, so he knew the right answer. The right answer is no, I'm not an empire builder. Well, I needed an objective way of doing that. And the only way for that to happen was intuition. And I'm about to describe the trappings of this because this is the first answer to your question, Kim, which is how do you begin to cultivate intuition? So I was on this plane ride. It was the evening, and I've been a meditator for a long time. I've meditated since I was 7. You don't have to be a meditator since you're 7 to do this. But basically, it's to empty your mind of all assumptions, all thinking, all words. If you can empty your mind of words, and you can sort of tune out and get rid of your sensory information and get just to the stillness place where your mind really is sort of receptive, and in the same way that you would be at a dragster race and you're waiting for the green light to go on in anticipation, that's a really great place to be. And I just started meditating on the various aspects of this. And so, what I decided to do with Larry, and I had a fit of inspiration, and this is the next thing: intuition usually has an aha or a eureka associated with it. And I know everybody's had an aha or eureka moment. And intuition, if you have an intuitive insight, that's exactly how it feels. And it's a great feeling. You're overcome with energy. There's an energy release in your body, kind of vibrates with this, wow, I know exactly how to solve this problem. So the way I solved this problem is I came up with a great question. And I knew it required a little bit of a setup for Larry. So I went to this dinner with Larry, and I waited until the evening, and the whole dinner had passed. And at dinner, there were other people there, other analysts, and they'd been asking him all kinds of questions about the business and, of course, about the acquisition. Nobody had asked him the empire building question, which was fortunate. And I waited until people were talking about their golf handicaps and things like that. And I asked Larry, I said, when you took over the company 15 years ago, contrast that feeling with where you are now. And that was my question. He said, oh my God, it's been a crazy journey. He said, I had no idea we would ever get to this place. And it's a really good feeling. And I feel like the company is well poised for the future. And, whoever inherits the CEO ship next. So the notion embedded in Larry's an empire builder is that he's got a plan of domination and to get as big as possible. And instead, in this moment where it's non-contextualized, what he says is essentially, we've been opportunistic when we could be. It's been a crazy journey, and I hope that we're positioning the firm for the next generation. That's a very different sort of an answer that an
Yes.
empire builder would give.
Yes.
And so I knew, based on my intuition, he was not an empire builder. So we increased our size and debit energy, and that turned out to be the right decision. So that's a really long-winded story,
Yeah.
but it shows how the fruits of intuition, they were the difference maker in that situation.
Yeah. Let's have you talk a little bit about what you see meditation doing for people who want to increase their intuition. Uh, I know, I'm sure that everybody here has heard of the benefits to meditation, but I really feel, especially in the intuitive investor, you talk about meditation really from a different perspective than what most people have heard, on the different things, platforms out there promoting it. What do you feel is the best enrollment conversation about the importance of meditation?
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a vast topic because meditation, I would think of, and for the listeners that don't meditate and either they're skeptical or whatever, or they've tried it and they've failed, is if you're going to be successful at anything in life, you need to have control over your mind and its functioning, including letting it go. And that sounds counterintuitive, uh, no pun, no pun intended, but it's not. It's really about the decision to think when you want to think, and the decision to not think when you don't want to think, and the ability to essentially use your mind as an instrument and you control it rather than it controlling you. And so there's a whole series of things that have to happen in order for you to tap your intuition. Meditation facilitates all of that stuff because it's really a science of gaining control over your mind. And people who have tried it, inevitably they say stuff like, oh, I hate that. And I can't do it. I tried meditation once and I felt foolish, or whatever the issues are. We'll come back to that. Let's put a push pin in that and we'll come
Sure,
back to
sure.
that. Um, and because that's a common response. The actually we'll just deal with it right now, just because I don't want to miss it.
Okay.
So I say to people all the time when they're first beginning meditation, if they have had that experience, I tried it once and I sucked at it. Well, no shit. Anything you try one or two times, you're going to be terrible at. And the when I talk to people, I say, if you started out from your house and you were going to go, say, 4 miles to on a bicycle to downtown, wherever your local neighborhood's downtown is or local community's downtown is, would you be critical of the fact that you were making corrections all along the way on the pathway there with your wheel? No. And the reason why is because you accept that a part of bicycle riding is not a perfect laser beam guided pathway that's the shortest down to the billionth of a meter, to be able to get there. You accept that part of bicycle riding is making adjustments. Well, that's exactly like meditation. And by the way, the very noticing of, hey, I'm thinking again, rather than I'm just still and observing, that is the benefit of the meditation. It's an indication that your mind has derivated and gone off the path, and you're supposed to redirect your consciousness to something else. And we can go into that if it's interesting, different meditation techniques. But that's my response to people who have done it, didn't like it. It's like guess what? The following exercise I'm about to describe, as a person who's meditated for 46 years, I've I'll just put the exercise out and tell you what my success level is. Count from 0 up to 9, and then back down to 0, and then back up to whatever. You repeat this series. If a stray thought, a stray observation, like a noise in the room, distracts you off that exercise, if anything other than um, doing the counting in your mind distracts you, have to start over. The highest I've ever gotten is to 9 and back down to 7. It's really a hard thing. And I've had people who like, who I'm certain they may be. I have to trust their self-report. But I've had people say, "Oh yeah, I was able to get up to 9, down to 0, up to 9, down to 0," and I've never done this exercise before. I'm like, you clearly don't have pretty good consciousness as to what your mind's really doing, because it's almost impossible to do
Yeah.
that. In any case, I bring this up because that's not a reason not to meditate. The very difficulty is the evidence that you need to meditate. Because if it is difficult for you, this is the missing bit in the connective tissue of all your different uh, information, synthesizing that information, knowing which information out of the billions of data points that are in your mind are relevant. As I described before, I knew which piece of information was important, which wasn't. Generally, it comes from meditation. So, and I guess the next thing I'll say about meditation is it has so many other additional investor benefits. So, for example, once you can begin to examine the contents of your mind, you can also see where your biases come from. I'll give one anecdote and then I'll pause again for the next question. I had an analyst that worked for me named Matt Schilt. Matt Schilt is now a successful real estate investor in Denver, a real estate developer, actually. And Matt had this predilection for high risk trades, like always high risk, always high risk. And I said, we need to get to the bottom of this, because you seem to like the risk more so than you like the investment. There's something about that that's happening. And so he was not a meditator. I taught him to meditate. And like a couple of months went by, and he came in on a Monday morning and he proudly declared, "My dad." And I'm like, what do you mean your dad? He goes, "That's why the high risk trades." I'm like, okay, tell me more. And he's like, well, when I was younger, I had an older brother who was bigger than me considerably and much more an athlete. And my dad and my brother and I used to go skiing all the time. This is a Colorado story. Actually, I think Matt was a Vermont skier. So we used to go skiing all the time. And my dad praised my brother over and over and over again. And I always felt like I couldn't get anything from my dad. And so what ended up happening is one time we were at the top of a mountain, and I said to myself, I would rather die than not beat my brother to the bottom of this mountain.
Wow.
And he's like, I skied with wild abandon. He's like, in retrospect, it was probably pretty stupid. But I got to the bottom, and my dad was like, that's what I'm talking about.
Wow.
And so his dad had reinforced this. Hey, when you take crazy risks, you get the love and attention, the
Yep.
reward, and the gratification from that activity. And so my pithy response, perhaps not the best and most supportive, I said, "Your dad doesn't fucking work here, Matt."
Oh shit.
So in any case, Matt was gained control of, and through meditation process
Yeah.
was able to trace the the roots of this autopilot that he had been on
Wow.
for years, and he was able to trace it back only through meditation. And the exercise I had given him is try and examine via meditation, where's the earliest time you remember feeling that feeling that you get when you tell me that we should buy the XYZ company instead of the ABC company. I need you to tell me, where was the first time you felt that? And that's when he was able to trace it back. That's only possible through meditation, self-reflection. And then we worked together to disable that so that he could regain objectivity in his investment
Yeah.
process. So anyway, I'll pause. I said a
Yeah,
ton.
so much powerful stuff, and what a powerful way to close it up with the concept of how he needed to get himself back to objectivity, and that is what was missing, and understandably so. Like, but how powerful, Jason, that you asked the right question. God bless him for being willing to hear that question and inquiring overnight to what the answer to that question was. It's so powerful. So, I do want to ask you something specific to do with our collection of people here, but let me pause myself and ask if there's any specific questions you guys do have for Jason. Please just raise your hand. Happy to give you the mic to ask the question. Um, because most of the time I find these are most valuable when they're very interactive. And if you have a question, even if you consider it very simple and basic, don't be afraid to not ask it here. I feel intuition is sometimes just can be so complex for people. And I feel there's some basic questions about intuition that we all want to ask. So feel free to do that. Erica, I'm going to first specifically ask you if you did have a question for Jason or wanted to revisit the question you posed that prompted this whole space in the first place. Erica, guys, be sure to follow her. Never mind Jason. Eric is the one who posed a question in a tweet that I put out. And because of that, we decided to have this space. So I'm adding you now as the speaker. Erica, thank you for being here and for your initial tweet that got this underway.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, I started reading the Jason's book, and I was curious if when you are developing, I guess, your intuitive sense with investing, can that apply to trading as well? And how much of it kind of goes into learning to trust yourself also?
Great questions. The first one is intuition is just a tool. It's a state of consciousness, just like analysis is a state of consciousness, and you can use it for whatever you want to. So, like the people that I have noticed in my life that are great chefs or great musicians or great whatever, they tend to have a very refined intuition. And so they're using their intuition there. So I don't see much difference between using intuition for trading or for investing. It's just, what problem are you trying to solve? Or as I say to my team as CEO of Deception and Truth Analysis, frequently when we're discussing something, I'll ask each of my team members when we're having debate, what are you trying to maximize? Because if you get alignment in terms of what people are trying to maximize, you can usually find alignment. And without surfacing that, you don't know. So if you're trying to maximize your trade and your preferred time horizon is, 1 hour or 2 hours or 2 days or whatever your time horizon is you prefer, you can use intuition for any of that. In terms of trusting yourself, so I think the most important thing for developing your intuition is to have some way of noticing the contents of your mind and gaining control of it. And it takes time, to be perfectly honest with you, to be able to do that. You can develop a witness consciousness where you just sort of, and formally scientists call it metacognition, which is awareness of awareness itself. And we've all had those moments where we like see the contents of our mind kind of objectively. And you want to be able to get to that place. Takes time, takes practice for most people, so that you can begin to unpack, as Matt Schilt did, like it's my dad and this crazy ski thing that happened. And when you begin to notice those contents, that's step one. Step two is once you notice the emotional underpinnings of the stuff, most emotions are behaviors created to solve a problem that was difficult and painful at some point in the past. That's true of the negative emotions. Positive emotions are typically reinforcement of great moments, and they can also be damaging. And you want to be able to have control over your emotional responses, which is why meditation is so powerful. So in Matt's case, it's like dialing back. Like for him, it was a really wonderful experience that his dad finally gave him the recognition and praise he wanted, but to continually seek it over and over and over again, and in a sort of unconscious way, was unhealthy for him. So he had to get back to, hey, I can choose my response to this emotional circumstance. So that's the next thing is, first one was notice the contents of your mind. Two is if you can notice the emotional underpinnings of stuff and check yourself. And sometimes it's useful even to write down. Like I used to have Post-it notes on my desk, like that were reminders. Like I had invested in this company, Six Flags Premier Parks was the original name of the company, PKS ticker. And then I think it was six. And I wrote down this thing: if the CFO reminds you of the carny, don't go to the circus. And like stuff like that is a reminder of check your emotions. And for him, this guy Jim Danhauser, I think, was the CFO. I felt sorry for the dude And I felt sorry for him because I could tell he was like, from the island of misfit toys. I have a little bit of the island of misfit toys to me as well. So there's an empathy for him. My shareholders didn't care that, he was from the island of misfit toys, and I felt sorry for him. And so like I'd put stuff like that up on my computer as reminders to myself of, hey, this emotional habit, just stop it. And so you need, the whole point here is to introduce a pause between stimulus and response. And without that pause, you're not going to get there. And then the third thing, Erica, relative to your point about trusting yourself, that's kind of like when you can begin to, I would say, keep your mind roughly quiet for a good minute or two, you can begin to play with intuition in really cool ways. And I still do it every once in a while, not as frequently, where you can begin to do, and I don't know people's commutes. Of the 14 people that are on here, I guess 13 people not named Jason. Um, but I used to do this game where I would follow people home from work and be like, kind of like, what's my intuition say where they're going to be turning left or right? Are they going to go straight at the next intersection? What neighborhood are they going to ultimately turn off at? And I would do that kind of exercise. You could do it in the grocery store too. Like I lived and worked in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the Whole Foods was always jammed because it was like the center of the universe until Trader Joe's came. And I used to do a similar thing at Trader Joe's, like, where's the shopper, or at Whole Foods, where's the shopper going to stop and what aisle are they going to down next? And you can actually have a felt sense of that, but not if your emotions are churning and the analysis is going. And it's really tempting in those instances to go, okay, well, this person's a little bit overweight, likely they're going to the pie aisle, or
Yeah.
something like that. It's hard to not let the analytical self intercede, because the intuition is more often right than not. And I still do this game. I see my mom every Wednesday and Sunday for dinner, and when I drive over there and when I drive back, I very frequently am like, okay, where are they going? Are they going past me? Are they going to keep driving after I turn right to go to my neighborhood? Are they going to go left up here at this intersection? And I'm right, I would say probably 7 and 10 or 8 and 10 times. Pretty good. When I first started that exercise a long time ago, I sucked. But it's this reinforcement and these low stakes moments and tests of intuition that build the confidence. And one of the cautionary tales about intuition is if you don't engage in the time and work to develop it, as I've just described as exercises, it's really tempting. And I've absolutely seen it where people are just like, they think intuition is a feeling of euphoria and they get really excited about investing. And so they'll just like, hey, I feel excited about this. And then they'll blame intuition. It's like, no, no, no. Intuition usually doesn't have an emotional sense about it until after the insight comes. And then you have this euphoric, like, aha, huzzah, eureka, something like that. But in the meantime, it actually looks like a sort of stony silence. But the way to build confidence is to train it and to test it in very low stakes ways, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Erica, any follow-up question to that?
I do. I have
Please,
two quick
please feel
questions.
free.
Thank you. My first is how often do you meditate, and if you do it for extended periods of time at a time? My second question is I've actually been doing intuitive development courses, but not for investment, for more of the spiritual side of things. And one of the biggest hurdles that for others and myself to overcome was learning the difference between what my intuition, quote unquote, sounds like or feels like versus my own thoughts. So I was curious if you had any specific tips or techniques that you use to differentiate between the two. 'Cause sometimes it can be hard to know who's talking.
You nailed it. That is, like, it's funny when Kim said she wanted to host this conversation, I said, well, I'll try my best. And the reason I say that I'll try my best, and I used to, when I was working as a consultant as well, teaching investment teams how to do intuition, I always said to the person who was my sponsor within the client, look, this is a fairly advanced teaching because it's difficult and it can take time. You just named, there are two three big obstacles to intuition. Not knowing the difference between instinct and intuition. I hope I answered that question. There, I think it's a fairly easy answer, but it can take people time to recognize that. And it's a little bit rhyming with your question, Erica, in terms of like, who's speaking. The next big one is being able to notice the emotional contents of your mind and to begin to strip off the emotional reactions that are all too frequent in most people's apparatus. Like, and I'm not saying this cynically, I'm saying this, I think, realistically. I think most people, when they, like, if we could really see the contents of their mind, we'd see the results of a very complex series of mental models that are firing and often in conflict with one another and without much evaluation and consciousness on the part of the person. So I think a lot of personalities are sort of out of control and they don't really recognize it. It's just their sort of daily experience. And I'm not being cynical. I just think that's true. And so for intuition to work, you have to have silence for exactly as you said, Erica, to be able to hear the inner voice. And your question is the last mile problem with intuition. And boy, did it take me a long time to realize like what my intuition when it's right feels like. And where it's not me psychologically projecting some obscure mental model in some obscure emotion. The thing that liberated me was exactly the exercises I was describing before, which are low stakes, where you're following somebody as a driver, or you're following them around in Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or whatever, and trying to evaluate where they're going to go. Like once you do that, if you have developed the ability to notice the contents of your mind and the feelings in your body, that's the reinforcement. And so that's how I learned to hear that voice. But that was the obstacle that in getting a good answer to that question took my intuition from working probably 60% of the time to probably 75 to 80. That sounds like a low level gain, but it was huge because it was really tough to do it, at least for me. And notice I say for me because I don't want to lead the witness. Don't think that this will necessarily be hard. Some people's experience, maybe this is really freaking easy. I can't believe he's saying that it's hard. So I don't want to lead the witness, but for me, it was really difficult to do that. When I've coached people, including analysts that worked for me on intuition, that tends to be the last mile problem. So I think you hit the nail on the head. All I can say is intuition responds to process and it responds to empirical evidence. So that empirical evidence you have to constantly test it, which is why those low stakes exercises are so important for being able to develop your intuition.
Erica, any other follow-ups?
Um, well, I think, yeah, I guess for in your experience, at least from my experience, was the more I ignored intuitive or instinctual responses in life in general, because again, I was practicing this more with in life, the less I heard it. So I did notice that just noticing it more did make me notice it more, if that makes sense. And just for an example, in my own experience with trading, I will sometimes find, especially if it is a stock that I'm accustomed to trading, I will have this sort of instinctual, oh, well, I know it's going to go this way because I've seen it in my mind. It's like, I know I've seen it a million times. And I'm wondering if that is what you consider to be the same as intuition, where it's not that analytical process thinking, but more that rapid instinctual response, but that's learned through experience.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to try and separate instinct from intuition in terms of what you did. I would describe what you described as intuition. Usually the result of intuition is a key insight that has synthesized huge amounts of information all at once. Instinct typically is in response to one specific stimulus, in my experience. And so for those who came in late, I gave the example of 150,000 or 300,000 years ago, you're at a sub-Saharan watering hole and you don't think there are any lions or warthogs or cheetahs or leopards around, and you start to reach in for water and a crocodile that was below the surface of the water emerges. The instinct, there's only one stimulus, crocodile, and the instinct is to get the hell away as soon as possible and save your life. Whereas intuition is like the thing I described with Larry Nichols of Devon, where it's a synthesis of all of that crap around the company and in silence on a plane ride. And it was in the evening, I was a little bit tired. And I'm like, what's the question I got to ask him? And it just appeared, accompanied by euphoria. I wasn't analytically thinking about it, but it was I had put it in my mind's eye as a concern, and very consciously just sort of let my mind give the answer, and it was a synthesis. But people confuse instinct and intuition because the outcome or the output from the process is instantaneous, but the processes to get there are totally different. Because with intuition, you're usually able to analytically trace the threads or understand the underlying logic. With instinct, you don't, and there's no reason to. And that distinction is very important.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was it for my questions. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much,
Thank you.
Erica, for the questions and for initiating this conversation with your amazing questions on Twitter. Be sure to follow Erica, but also follow Jason. Jason, I'm very fortunate to know since 2017. We got connected when I was writing my book, Transforming Wall Street, and I really heard so many things about Jason and his approach in finance that were definitely unique. And I have just had so much support from you, Jason, and encouragement when I was writing my book, but also so much wisdom gained from you as a person, also from your incredible book, The Intuitive Investor. Just for context, everybody, Jason is the co-founder and CEO at Deception and Truth Analysis, Inc. Be sure to follow him here on Twitter. He puts out some fascinating tweets, but just so much data. There's an exercise, Jason, that you speak about. We talked about it in my podcast interview with you a couple of years ago. I wonder if you would do that with our group here. We only have a few minutes left, but it's such a powerful one to really awaken people to some of what you're discussing. Is that something you'd be open to doing?
Sure. Are you talking about the temperature of the
Yes.
room or the temperature of the space you're
Yes,
in?
I am.
Okay. All right. Yeah, sure. I'm smiling because I have a lot of exercises. I was trying to
I
remember
do.
which one we had done, but that must be it. Okay, so for those who are tuning in, we're going to do a very simple exercise, and that is we're gonna pause. We're going to go into silence, or at least I'm going to go into silence for 15 seconds, and we're going to tune into the feeling of the temperature of the space that we are in, and then we'll come back in after that time, and we'll talk about people's experience, and in particular, what happened to them. So I'm going to count down from 5 down to 0, and when I hit 0, then for 15 seconds, just tune into the feeling of the temperature of the space you're in. You could be outside, so that's why I changed it from room. But anyway, I'm going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, that's by my count 15 seconds. So I normally when I do this live and in person and I can poll for feedback, I ask people what the experience was, but I've done this now and by the way,
Yeah.
Kim, we've known each other since 2011,
Oh my,
not
oh
2017.
my,
It's been much
oh
longer.
wow, that's
We would never, yeah. Anyway, so I've been doing this exercise a lot since 2010. I've probably done it several hundred times. The typical responses to people's experiences, they had a thought into their mind, which was something like, the space or the temperature in the room is 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. and they have quantified this experience. Some people have the experience and frequently report, how the hell does this make me money as a trader? This is totally useless. And they evaluate the exercise. Still others are describe it as, well, it's a little hot in here. Maybe I should open a window, or maybe the air conditioner will kick on soon. I see you, Kim, Ann Curtin. Something to that effect. Very rarely do people just tune into the feeling of the temperature of the room. And almost immediately, the mind begins to quantify, evaluate, describe, you name it. It does everything but the exercise of tuning into the feeling of the temperature of the room. And the exercise is powerful because it shows how hard it is to turn off the mind and the apparatus. We are taught almost since birth to evaluate things as people, and our parents do it. Do you like that soda, or do you like this soda? What do you want for dinner? Do you like that color? Do you like that shirt? And we're constantly in eval mode, and it's really hard to turn off that thing. But a dog or a cat sitting next to you, they're also having an experience of the temperature of the room that is not, as far as we know, verbal or quantifiable, right? They're not sitting there converting it into some hidden numerical system that some hidden mathematics. So it is possible to have an independent of thought or independent of rational thought experience of the temperature of the room, but it's really hard for people to do it. And if you did that exercise and you had a straight thought enter, it is exactly the work that needs to be done, because like really good meditators, people good at intuition, they'd be able to tune into just what it felt like and their senses would be giving them that feedback about the temperature. And most people can't do that. So that's the exercise.
Thank you for doing it. I think what you're speaking to again in that particular exercise is how infrequently we are coming from a place of objectivity. And it is that objectivity that every trader, and never mind investor, wants to meet the market with. If you aren't in that objectivity, you potentially are coming in with an agenda. At least that's what I'm, saying half the time to the clients I'm coaching. I hear their agenda and reflect it back to them, because when you have that agenda, you can't be objective, you can't be neutral.
Kim, sorry, I was taking a glass of water. I think you nailed it. That's exactly why intuition is important. I consider it to be a state of almost pure objectivity. And almost always where my quote unquote intuition has failed me, it's been because of the issues that Erica has highlighted, which is, is it really intuition that's delivered this aha moment, or is it, your deep felt desire to be able to have an answer? By the way, like a secondary or tertiary skill around intuition is, it's okay if you don't have intuition about something. Some people try and force an outcome, and sometimes it just doesn't come, and that's a particular indulgence that can be deadly. Like, I'm trying to understand this stock, and how this stock is going to respond to what's going on in Israel and Hamas, and I really need an answer from my intuition. Doesn't work that way. That's an emotional preference that is designed or most likely going to result in a quantifiable analytical answer rather than an intuitive answer.
It's setting you up to go to the intellect for that answer, it sounds like to me, the way you just posed that.
Yeah, it just, intuition doesn't respond that way, because to have, and this is one of the exercises in Intuitive Investor as well, Erica, you may have gotten to it. There's this whole discussion and narrative in the book about where emotions come from. And to me, it's a sense of something with preference attached to it. So with the temperature of the room, the preference may be, it's too hot in here for me. By attaching the preference to it, you create emotion. And the emotion is, I don't like it, too hot, right? And you've evaluated it, and you've evaluated relative to your preferences. You can't have just the observation without the preference. And it's really hard to separate those two things out. And so, yeah, I think you nailed it, Kim.
The observance without the preference is something every trader should put on a post-it and put put over their desk right now, observance without the preference, because half the time traders do go in with the preference. They want something to happen, but observance without the preference is just the most succinct posted I've ever heard, Jason. It's so powerful.
Well, I'll give you an example of that. So I've studied martial arts, as Kim, you know, pretty extensively. And the best line of that ever is, and there's an extended version of Enter the Dragon by Bruce Lee, and they ask him about his technique. And he said, "My technique is the technique of no technique." And what he's not being, you know, uh, people don't like Buddhist koans or they don't like that kind of thinking. But what he's saying essentially is just what you're saying, Kim. He's saying, if my martial arts is really good, if my trading is really good, I don't care what the stimulus is. I don't care what the market environment is. I'll get to the truth of the matter and know how to respond thoughtfully with my decision making, and I don't approach it with preference. And so, like Bruce Lee has this really cool book called The Art of Expressing the Human Body,
Mm-hmm.
and he goes through all the ways in which you can, you know, maim and kill and hurt people. And he's like, you want to have a full repertoire. He's like, some martial artists would never consider biting their opponent, but he's like, if it's my life or the other life, I'm for sure biting, and I want to know the biting technique and where the right place is to bite. And that's technique without technique,
Right.
right? You're not going to learn that in a taekwondo class or a kung fu class or a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class. I'm going to teach you to bite because it's inappropriate. But as soon as you bring those preferences in, all of a sudden you've stopped being an artist. You're just martial,
Yeah.
right? You're a martial executor of a particular martial art, but the true artist is unconstrained by technique and with those
Yeah.
preferences. So yeah, it is the technique of no technique. It is the day trading or the trading of no
Yes,
trading.
exactly, exactly. Uh, so many other questions. It could be that we'll have to do a part two one day because I feel like let me double check before we close it up. If there's any other questions here, I have some familiar faces here. Please, Kyle, Pat, Tom, Shane, if any of you have some questions, even you, Mr. Cotter, just feel free to raise your hands. I'll give you guys the mic. Before we close, Jason, for those who are saying, okay, I'm going to take my intuition more seriously, I am going to start to perhaps facilitate this muscle and give it more attention, what would you say are the steps you would point someone towards the mini coaching version of how to really develop that intuition as a trader or just as a human?
Yeah, I'll just go back to what I outlined before is the three steps. You have to be able to high level put a pause between stimulus and response. And the way you can do that is to begin to examine the contents of your mind. Meditation is a great way to develop the ability to examine the contents of your mind, where you're in control of your mind in your observations, as opposed to your mind being in control of you in your observations. And that sounds strange, but metacognition is a function of human consciousness where we can observe ourselves. It's the awareness of awareness itself. So that's step one. Step two is you have to do probably, depending on the person, some work or a lot of work around tracing what are the sources of your emotional apparatus. Like, for example, one for me, in full confession, that I'm still trying to undo is impatience. And the emotion there is disappointment and frustration. And I constantly am trying to like trace back what's the source of that. And you have to be able to strip that away because those are the influencers or the English on the ball that if they're there, you're not going to get to objectivity. You're going to be stuck in subjectivity, to use your language, Kim, which was, I think, spot on. And then step three is, to Erica's point, you have to be able to recognize what intuition feels like in that voice. And the only way to do that is through empirical, in my estimation, research, where you do lots of experiments. And I volunteered, like you could do that at Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or following people in traffic, which is engage in these exercises where you're trying to get to that quiet place, the objective place, and you can sort of like, okay, where's this person going to turn off down this aisle or go this way home? And just track your success. And when you're successful, then you evaluate, okay, how did that feel? And I think what you'll discover is there's a central tendency there, which will allow you to develop a feeling of what your intuition feels like. So I think those three steps are the
Yeah,
key.
after you and I met and you taught me that technique, I began to actually use it in the subway. And whenever I was at a station like 14th Street, Union Square, what train was going to come first? Was it going to be the express train or the local? And I would just try to tune in to which one and then stand at that track to just test myself. So there's a lot of ways that I think everybody can use this practice and start to develop it. But it was it was an incredible experience, Jason, because I could see how much better I got at that over time. It was really quite amazing.
Oh, I can't resist. I know we're a minute
It's
over, but
okay.
this is the one I still do. I was just in the UK last week, and I don't live in New York anymore. I live in Sarasota, Florida. But my exercise is on the train platform. Where will the doors open up? And I developed that intuition in probably my best intuition in the whole world, maybe because, in answer to the question of what am I trying to maximize, it's getting on the train and getting home as soon as possible so I can get to the life I want to do, which is I work so I can live rather than I live to work. And
Wow.
like where will the doors open up? Because if you're first on the train, you make it. Otherwise, you got to wait on the platform at rush hour. And I was 90% successful knowing where
Wow.
those doors were going to open
That is
up.
so cool. That is so cool. I was always afraid to get too close to those train tracks at Union Square, to be honest. But at least I was pointed towards the right direction. Yeah, but maybe you're gutsier than I was.
Well, nobody ever pushed me in. So,
I wasn't really
yeah.
afraid of getting pushed in. I was just afraid that train, when it would come in at full throttle, would just suck me into the wind. They come in sometimes 40 miles an hour. I'd be like, if they passed us, if they were passing us, of course. Jason, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you, everybody who asked. Erica, thank you for your questions. Nobody else asked questions, but I appreciated your questions and your tweet to begin with, Erica. See what happens when you put a tweet out on X, I guess I should call it. Like, we have a whole amazing conversation with really one of the best teachers of intuition I feel the whole industry has. And I'm so grateful. And I can't believe we know each other for 12 years, Jason. That is
Yeah,
remarkable.
definitely not
That
2017. It was
is
definitely
just
2011. I remember exactly because I was in an office at CFA
CFA
Institute that I
Institute.
only occupied in 2011.
That's right. That's right. That is where we first met. Oh my God, I can't believe it. That is so long ago. It just time flies, man, when you're having fun. All right, we might have to do this again, Jason, because I think there's so much richness here to discuss. But thank you for this time you gave all of us today. Really remarkable conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you to everybody who attended. Kim, thanks for hosting. Erica, great idea. Way to trust your intuition.
Exactly. All right, I'll close it up there, guys. This whole thing will be out there as a recording. And thank you for all attending. And thank you, Erica, for the idea. Aloha for now, guys, and a hui ho.